Welcome to Week 9. This week we'll cover 3 things. First, the business and social implications of big data. We'll look at big data in the industry of healthcare. And lastly, how should big data abuses be addressed? Looking forward to it. We'll be covering ethics and data analytics. The learning objectives are threefold. One is looking at the business and social implications of big data, looking at big data in healthcare, and how big data abuses can be addressed. Actually, we're going to kind of combine them all. We're going to talk about big data in healthcare and all these items within that topic. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk about big data in healthcare, and the reason that makes sense is because it's one of the most protected areas of data analytics anywhere, more than almost anything, for very obvious reasons. But in particular, we'll have some definitions. We'll talk about ethical principles in bioethics, guidelines and regulations, data integrity, and applications for ethics and maintenance of data integrity. So here are the 2 key definitions: integrity and ethics. So integrity is a strict adherence to a standard of value or conduct, and ethics is a principle of right or good conduct. So ethical principles are beneficence. That means to absolutely do no harm or minimize harm and maximize benefit. Respect of persons means that we want to use an informed consent. If people are part of a data study or data that is generated by a study. And anyone who's vulnerable must be protected. And obviously you want to be fair and do justice. Now you'll notice that these topics are not unique to big data, but they apply to them all the more because of the use of data. Clinical data versus research data, and are the ethics any different? The fact is that they are not. Both require privacy and confidentiality. In a research study, you would have informed consent or implied consent. In a clinical study, you absolutely make sure that the data is integrity and high quality, and you must secure and store it. So here are some of the ethical guidelines for research in general, and that includes the data. So the Declaration of Helsinki, the CIOMS guidelines for medical sciences, the Belmont Report, all of these things are internationally recognized and adhered to. Here's some of the regulations here in the United States. You've heard of Title 15, Part 16, FDA 21 CFR 50, the National Institute of Health, and HIPAA, which has to do with health records or clinical records. And here's a little bit more elaboration on all these things. The human subject protections, IRB requirements. If, for example, you were to do a big data study here at Cal Poly Pomona, you'd be required potentially to go to the IRB if it involves people and involves anything that we're collecting from people. The human subject means the person that the investigator would be conducting conducting research with and obtains data. Privacy and confidentiality applies to every bit of clinical and research data. The concern is to not do harm, actually to protect individual patients and safeguard all members on the team, the research team or clinical team. Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, which was passed in 1996, and it governs everything to do with health records. And then here's the privacy rule. Basically, we must maintain privacy at all times. And if you intend to publish something, you have to get authorization and have that dealt with. So here's some examples of some individually identifiable information and what's protected. All of these things would really zero in on an individual subject or patient, and they cannot be disclosed or exposed in any way. So again, how does all this translate into practice? So, in electronic health information, it doesn't matter whether it's clinical or research data. We have to make sure we have high quality and constantly improve it. The main thing is that it actually benefits society, and we maintain confidentiality and privacy. We cannot use the data without the patient's knowledge, or we don't want to have any kind of violation of confidentiality, and may exclude some populations that have historically been oppressed or are vulnerable. We've mentioned in previous segments is making sure that the data is accurate, correct, and valid for purpose. And also, in addition to that, we have to have a process which governs everything from the collection of data, transfer of it, storage of it, sharing of it, and any kind of use for analysis. Further, we have to do everything possible to prevent the falsification or fabrication of data, any kind of human error, any kind of misconduct, research misconduct, and we have to do everything possible to maintain the data using reasonable data management techniques. So again, going further, we have to make sure that we're using the right kind of experimental or research design. The record keeping is accurate, and there's making sure that we have established criteria for including or excluding data from an analysis, and also make sure that we use the proper techniques for collection, use, and sharing of data. So everyone that's part of the any part of the data is responsible for making sure that we maintain and safeguard the integrity of the data. And the ultimate responsibility lies with the principal investigator, whoever is launching the study and has gained approval from the Institution Review Board. They have absolutely the highest accountability to make sure that they comply with the requirements that are expressed to them or mandated upon them by the IRB. So, data collection and integrity, again, must be maintained at all times, all phases, and use all techniques to make sure that there's no bias or any other problems that will cause bad conclusions or bias in the outcomes. Using the appropriate data is also important. Using the right statistical methods and the best possible reporting to maintain the integrity. So in the analysis, it's important that we evaluate the reasons for including or excluding of data. We must document, how the data was obtained, selected, and analyzed, again, to protect the overall study that uses data. Another key question is how long can the data be retained? In some cases, because it's such large volumes of data, it may not be practical to store it for a very long time. So the main thing is that the data should be retained long enough so that it may be reconstructed if necessary, and have to comply with the necessary requirements of both the regulations and the IRB to make sure we don't violate or cause data to be destroyed prematurely or handled inappropriately. The sharing of data, again, is very, very key. It must be de-identified. All the private information must be taken out so that when you share it with others, that you aren't compromising privacy in the data. Security means that it's secured, kept in a protected environment, that you have to have access granted through a audit trail of steps and through authorization, and that you maintain it through regular backups and proper archiving. The last step is who actually owns the data. Is it the patient? Is it the institution? Is it whoever provided funding for the study? Is it the investigator, or is it who is going to publish the study? As we mentioned earlier, the owner of the data and the most accountable person is obviously the investigator, and they are responsible to make sure that everything that happens to the data from their own analysis and beyond, it protects the data from any kind of compromise or bias. That completes week 9 of our course.